Thank you again, everyone, for coming today. We opened in 2007 and we're Australia's first and only community justice centre, and we are a world first international mentor community court. We are part of a global network of community justice centres worldwide. We've had many evaluations done over the years, and compared to other magistrates' courts, the Neighbourhood Justice Centre has proven its ability to reduce recidivism, with offenders 25% less likely to re-offend. As mentioned in the video, offenders have an increased accountability, with clients nearly twice as likely to complete community corrections orders, as well as an increase in compliance with intervention orders. And equally as important, the City of Yarra community has increased confidence in the justice system. Now, our speakers. We have Louise Bassett, Strategy and Innovation Manager. Louise explores and develops new ideas and initiatives to identify their potential to benefit the local community and justice system overall. Louise oversees strategic planning and manages the program innovations team. Her can-do attitude is behind many Australian firsts the NJC has brought to life. She has been with the NJC for nearly a decade now. And Anita de Blasio, our Peacemaking Program Manager. Anita was gazetted as a mediator back in 2001 and has worked in the appropriate dispute resolution sector since, with the Dispute Settlement Centre of Victoria and Domestic Building Dispute Resolution Victoria as an accredited media, counsellor and trainer. Anita was the NJC Mediation Service Manager from 2007 to 2016. And she's worked in the not-for-profit sector as a community development worker in various programs and projects for migrants and refugees. Welcome, Louise and Anita.
Thanks very much, Alicia, and good afternoon to everyone, and good evening to our US guests. We've got a few guests joining us from America at an unearthly hour, so really delighted people are joining us for this speaker series. So I want to talk to you about innovation at the centre, and if you could just roll to the next slide, Alicia. So I'm going to talk about the history of innovation at the centre in two fairly distinct phases. Then the program innovation team, which, as Alicia mentioned, drives a lot of the justice innovation work at the centre, along with another range of functions. Then we're going to have a bit of a look at where we get our ideas for innovation, the source of our inspiration. And I'll then shift into a bit of a case study of our most recent justice innovation, the newly established NJC Peacemaking Service. I'll introduce that, then I'll hand over to my colleague, Anita de Blasio, the Program Manager. So in terms of the history of innovation at the Neighbourhood Justice Centre, really the first phase is what I see as the pilot phase, when the Neighbourhood Justice Centre was first established as a pilot project. It had high hopes, but we didn't know if it would be a success. So it had pilot funding from 2007 to 2013. And then when it obtained ongoing funding in 2013, it really moved into another phase in its innovation and became more the innovator. So I'll be talking about that to you as well. So that first phase, in 2007, as Alicia said, the centre opened its doors. And it was really a groundbreaking, pioneering experiment in the Victorian justice landscape at the time. Indeed, in the Australian justice landscape, to date, it's the first and only community justice centre in Australia. It's based on the Red Hook Community Justice Centre in Brooklyn in the US, was the inspiration for establishing the centre. And as well as the goals around crime prevention and better engagement with local communities around issues of crime and safety, it's got a distinct innovation goal. So that is to contribute to cultural and procedural change in the justice system. So the people driving the establishment of the centre and the founders of the centre were very conscious of the fact that within large bureaucracies, it can be really difficult to get change. There are a lot of barriers and disincentives there. And this can particularly be the case in the justice system under the rule of law. You've got so much to protect and to defend. And while all of that can be really beneficial, it can mean you miss out on some opportunities for really meaningful and significant reforms. Risk-averse cultures can quickly breed. Victoria's quite lucky in that it's already got a history of significant reform and innovation in the justice system. But even with that, the people designing the centre, the founders, were really conscious of putting in place enablers, I guess you would say, to overcome some of the familiar barriers to change. So some of those things were things like authorising environment, making sure that the first director of the centre had very few layers of approvals to get through to if issues had to be escalated, and also giving her a high degree of autonomy and decision-making power at a local level. Under a community justice centre model, you need to be able to be responsive to local needs and get onto them quickly and come up with innovative solutions to crime and justice issues. So you really need to empower people to be able to make those decisions locally. Also, in terms of the talent and culture of the centre, that was a big part of the strategy in building an innovative centre. So the recruitment strategy for the centre really emphasised not just ensuring people had the right technical skills and experience for their roles, but the right attitude, mindset, and values coming in to make this work. So they're really at pains to make sure people wanted to break new ground and wanted to be part of this pioneering experiment and would help it along. Also, having a multidisciplinary team at the centre, as Alicia's mentioned, we've got a court, so you have a magistrate and registry staff there. We've got clinical staff in our client services team, we've got program staff, we've got police prosecutors, we've got community corrections, amongst others, all coming from very different backgrounds and different experience. So when you've got wicked problems to deal with, it really helps to have all these different points of view coming together and creates a fertile ground for innovation. And the architects of the centre really got the brief when it came to this as well. They made sure there were areas where people could sit together, have unplanned incidental communication. So we didn't create sort of physical silos between the different teams in the centre, but really encouraged people talking to each other and building those relationships. They also created spaces for private work as well, because not all innovation's about being in one big group and brainstorming together. Sometimes you need places to go off and daydream also. So this phase was really about innovating to make the model work and to make it effective. Staff were encouraged to basically come with a clean slate beyond the prescribed sort of minimum requirements of their roles, particularly statutory roles. They were encouraged to come up with new processes, not take the procedures manual from wherever they've worked before and just try and duplicate it here. So there was some resistance to this early on. I think some staff felt a bit like, yeah, it was an ambiguous environment and they had to build it from the ground up. But once they got confidence around doing that, we found that they'd established new processes that were really effective in meeting the centre's goals. And it was really about innovating within this pilot environment. So some of the practices that developed are listed there. And for example, court reviews sprung up. That was a process to enable the magistrate to meet with a client who was on a corrections order with their corrections officer, monitor their progress and really leverage that judicial authority to make them more accountable and try and deal with any problems in their progress on the order. That was the inspiration for what's now judicial monitoring across the state. So you can see there how during this phase, some of the innovations contributed to change in the justice system more broadly beyond the centre. A byproduct really of building the Community Justice Centre was we'd created the ideal conditions for what we like to call a living lab. So during this phase, it was about going beyond just establishing the centre and its operations. Staff were more confident in their practice by this stage. The centre had matured. It had been a subject of what feels like 1 million evaluations attesting to the centre's effectiveness. So, and with that culture and sort of mandate for been able to experiment, try things out, and people really embrace the action learning culture of the centre, where it was about being curious, not have to guarantee success before you've even made a move, but taking calculated risks to try new ideas and approaches that could benefit the community and the justice system. We moved into technology-based innovation at this stage. Prior to that, all the innovation had been around new programs, services, and practices within those. So yeah, this digital work really sort of marked the shift to becoming more of a living lab. And what we appreciated we had also with the centre was pretty much a microcosm of the justice system and the community within our walls. So having a court here, having all the justice agencies on site, having all the community services agencies, and you've got a defined geographic environment in which to test things out. In the city of Yarra, it's not too big, but large enough to make a meaningful trial site. It meant you had this really great base in which to test out ideas in real life. So I've just moved to the next slide. A key example of this, as mentioned in the video, was the online family violence intervention order application. So this was our first digital innovation, and it came about when a family violence magistrate and the then Department of Justice requested, could we take the existing paper-based intervention order application and put it online? We thought this sounded pretty easy, it would be done in weeks. But the more we looked at what existed with the paper-based version, the more we realised a new design process was needed to make it more user-friendly and really put often traumatised or stressed family violence victim survivors at the centre of our thoughts and at the centre of the process in designing this, so it would be more convenient for them, give them a greater sense of agency in the process and knowing what was coming next. Took out all the legal wording and jargon wherever possible and made it much easier to understand and enabled them to tell their story up front before they then had to move into the more administrative detail that's required for an application. It was also about appreciating the role of court staff, so registry staff as well. In looking at the paper-based process, we saw there was a lot of data entry, manual entry they had to do. There's quite an administrative burden on them that took away time that could be better spent having a meaningful exchange with people applying for an intervention order. So we developed that application, very much trying to put humans at the centre of that design and improve their experience of the process. We trialled it in 2015, and then in 2016, the Royal Commission into Family Violence in Victoria had a look at what we'd done there and recommended that it be rolled out statewide. We obtained some funding to enable this to happen, and now a version based on the trial we developed is available across the state. So all family violence victim survivors who are applying for an intervention order can now benefit from that system. Just giving you a glimpse of some of our other technology-based applications and trials. ERecovery, this is a mobile phone-based alcohol and other drug relapse prevention app that we're currently trialling with our clients, with corrections, and with our client services, our clinical alcohol and other drug workers. And it's based on very extensive research within the States out of a university there that first developed the app. And that's part of what attracted us to this system, that it's got such a sound research base. And we're trialling it to see its effectiveness for clients within the justice space, how effective it is for them in supporting them in their recovery, and also as a clinical tool for our alcohol and other drug workers, how effective it is in supporting their work and adding benefit there. So we're trialling that in conjunction with the University of Melbourne, who are conducting the research side of that. And that's coming up to about 2 years we've been trialling that now. So Interact, so that's the intervention order active case triage system. So what this is a tool to enable workers at the centre behind the scenes, so it's not something clients see, enables workers to better coordinate their workflows, communicate with each other around clients and their needs, clarify who's supporting which client, identify risk, and enable us to work better behind the scenes so we better support the client on the day of court. So this is for both family violence and personal safety intervention orders. So that's currently been implemented at the centre after a successful trial. So in my case, this is another digital application that aims to give more clarity to people who are coming to court about when their case is ready to go into court. We all know there's often significant delays in courts and waiting times. So this is about managing that wait better. And it also collects metrics around how long different types of cases take, depending on the matter and depending on the people involved. So it's helping us build up data there so we can better predict the timeliness of matters. It also helps workers behind the scenes coordinate their activities so there's less delay in getting a matter to court. So online guilty plea enabled people to plead guilty online, basically, to minor traffic infringements and violations so that they didn't have to spend a day taking off work or arranging childcare to appear in court. So the program innovation team are the team who drive much of this innovation work. But I want to point out from the start that innovation's a centre-wide brief. So all staff at the centre make different contributions to the innovation work we do. But the program innovation team's like the engine or the driver of this work and provides a consistent focus for it. And it's also got the skills base to properly support it. So the various functions listed there, justice innovations, as you had a glimpse of, education and public programs. So opportunities like this are part of the work of education and public programs. So that's very much about increasing awareness and understanding of our model and promoting its adoption. Under a community justice centre model, community engagement and crime prevention are really critical parts of the work. So we have people who focus on that. So engaging with community organisations primarily, but also individuals across the city of Yarra and coming up with crime prevention initiatives. We also have a research monitoring, evaluation and learning function. So that provides the evidence base for our work. Are we being effective? Is this the best use of our resources? What service or what direction or priorities are we going to look at next? So these functions enable us to do that with evidence to support it. And strategic planning and policy, the team's responsible for the current 5-year strategic plan for the centre. And also often it's the preparation of business cases or documenting our model so people can better understand it. The team have generalist skills as well as technical skills in these areas. They've got generalist skills in program management, change management, program development, which enabled them to drive this activity for the centre. They also work across the city of Yarra in their work. It's very collaborative work, and also with Magistrates Court of Victoria and other justice agencies. So where do we get our ideas for inspirations? They can come from a multitude of sources. We like to say we're really strategic about it, and sometimes we are, but there is a random element to this which probably makes the work more delightful, I think. So we're often scanning for promising practice and innovations elsewhere. So in other jurisdictions in Australia and overseas, seeing what they're doing and what's been effective is a source of a lot of inspiration for us. Also, on the same level, research and also evaluations of our work often point to areas where we can make more improvements or expand our service or program. As with the Family Violence Intervention Order online application, requests come to us directly sometimes from the Magistrates Court of Victoria and other justice agencies. And we really do like to emphasise that to people that, it's not just about our ideas, it's about us responding to ideas we receive from elsewhere as well. such as Neighbourhood Justice Centre clients, community members, staff and stakeholders. So that can be direct requests to us or feedback through surveys or evaluations or other means. Fellowships and student placements are also a great source of development and inspiration for innovations. So I showed you online guilty plea and also interact just before, and that initially arose from the work of a fellow we had placed here, a Code for Australia fellow. So that's a technology-based fellowship, and the fellow under that basically attached himself to the centre, got to know the staff and their practices, and spent a lot of time observing and identifying areas where we could use technology to improve how effective we were and improve the experience for our clients. And also analogous practice in other sectors. I had experience one day of going to the airport and looking at the arrivals and departures board and thinking, with all the flights coming into Melbourne Airport, well, there were at that stage, not so much at the moment, and all the different languages and countries involved in planning and scheduling that, if they can put an arrivals and departures board up for that, we should be able to do something better for our clients around communicating what's coming into court and what's almost on its way out. So that was part of the inspiration for the My Case application you saw. And I want to emphasise too, I've highlighted some of the technology-based innovations, but the innovation work at the centre is also program and service-based as well. So Neighbourhood Justice Centre Peacemaking Service, which was established this year, is a key example of a recent service-based innovation. So what the service is about providing a safer, more structured processes to bring people together who've been affected by conflict or crime, aims to set relations right, improve the situation and address the harm that's been caused. So where did we get the inspiration for this? We sort of turned to what we like to call our mothership in some ways, the Red Hook Community Justice Centre. I was lucky enough to go there in 2018 and see their centre in action and was really impressed by their peacemaking service. It was operating in schools to keep students engaged who would otherwise be at risk of being suspended or expelled because they'd come into conflict with the school community. It was being used with neighbours who sometimes were involved in assault cases or similar to our intervention order style cases. And instead of just having them both applying for intervention orders endlessly against each other, it really took an approach of looking at what's the source of the conflict and the rift between them. Can we solve that? Much as in the same way, we look at what are the underlying issues causing offending, which may be, drug and alcohol based, mental health, similar things. Peacemaking kind of took that approach to relationships and conflict. But I've got to point out, it's not the first time we had this idea. I think it came together for us much more with Red Hook. And when I talked to the judge there, Alex Calabresi, he said to me, in his years of working in criminal justice reform, this was the most impressive innovation he'd ever seen. So it had really great credentials there. But we'd attempted something similar in the past and had some success, but hadn't quite struck the right note. Anita will go into that in a bit more detail, but just want to point out that a lot of these innovations aren't overnight success stories. Sometimes it's about keeping the idea alive for long enough until you find the right time for it or the right model or method for it. So, and also innovations about looking at what conditions you want in the future, but sometimes you have to look to the past and what you've done before and learn from that as well. So I'll hand over now to Anita Blasio, who, as Louise said, is the Peacemaking Program Manager, and she'll step you through the Peacemaking Service, our most recent innovation.
Thank you, Louise. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone here today also. As Louise said, I'm the Peacemaking Program Manager. So what I'm going to do is just talk to you a little bit about how peacemaking fits within the NJC, a little bit about the journey of getting the service up and running, given it's a relatively new service, and also an example of the type of work we're currently undertaking. Now, the NJC's establishing legislation has a significant focus on simplifying access to the justice system and applying therapeutic and restorative approaches in the way we do justice. Now, what we mean when we talk about a restorative approach in the NJC context is that we're trying to build healthy communities. We're increasing social capital, decreasing crime and antisocial behaviour. And we're also trying to repair harm and improve relationships between people and communities. This underpins our work at the NJC. Now, our strategic plan also commits us, the NJC, to identify, analyse and respond to unmet priority community needs. And an example of a significant unmet need are the complex and unresolved conflicts within the City of Yarra community. And as you're probably all aware, these can actually lead to a range of issues within the community, from young people disengaging from school, breakdown in relationships, and significant harm can be caused to people and the communities. Now, peacemaking's provided an opportunity for the NJC to address these unmet priority needs within the Yarra community that wasn't perhaps captured under in the previous NJC model, given that peacemaking is now up and running. As Louise mentioned before, we have had 2 attempts. We have had 2 past restorative programs at the NJC. Our first one was the Young Adult Restorative Justice Pilot, which was open to offenders aged between 18 and 25 years who were alleged to have committed an offence in the City of Yarra. Now, the final evaluation identified that the scope of the program was far too selective, and within its existing form, it just couldn't get enough referrals and be viable. So that ended in 2010. A few years later, we had the community conferencing program, which ran for about 2 years. It did have some successful cases. The program manager did move on. So NJC did take some time out to really think about, okay, how do we need to shape another restorative program to better meet the needs of the community? Now, peacemaking's building on these past 2 programs. There are a lot of lessons to be learned, and there are a number of things within these 2 programs that we can replicate and build on those successes. Once, as Louise explained, where the idea came from, the Red Hook Community Justice Centre over in the US, once they came back, they had a bit of a think about how they would go about looking at setting up a similar program and perhaps making it a bit more adapted to what our needs here are. What NJC did was employed a technical advisor in David Moore, who's been involved in the restorative justice movement since the 1990s, and he's helped establish a number of evaluator programs globally. Once David was on board, there was, of course, a whole lot of planning done as to how do we move forward with this. And I was brought on board then to conduct some pretty thorough consultations within the community and within the NJC to identify where the gaps were, what the needs were, and the information from the consultations actually informed the service design and operations. Now, I conducted consultations from around October 2019 to February this year and spoke to well over 50 stakeholders, very diverse stakeholders, and also spoke with dispute settlement services and different restorative programs. Now, as a result of these discussions, we identified a real need in the community for a service that would be flexible and really respond to the complex and changing needs of community conflicts. Now, within the consultations, we asked stakeholders to build a bit of a picture for us, to provide us with some real life examples that could have been dealt with in peacemaking. Now, I'm just going to take you through one example that was provided to us by a lawyer at the Neighbourhood Justice Centre, and this is one of many examples that were provided. Now, there had been a situation involving a number of families. They were all living on the same public housing estate and from the same culturally and linguistically diverse communities. Now, up until the situation, they had had a really good, tight relationship. Now, the young adults from these families were really, really good friends. One night they went out drinking together and got up to some mischief. Now, this is really it was really out of character for these young people. They'd been doing really well in school and universities. The families were really proud of them, and they were the emerging community leaders. Now, after this incident of the young people going out drinking, their families became involved in an argument over that night. A lot of blame was given who led who. And it escalated into conflict, resulting in some really aggressive behaviour and threats being made. Now, the police were called out a number of times, and the police actually took out a personal safety intervention order application on behalf of one of the family members against the others. Now, this was perceived by the other family members as the police taking sides, which didn't help the situation. And I just want to note that later the police did withdraw their application and distance themselves from the situation. Now, the conflict escalated even further, and a number of family members took out cross applications against each other. At court, when they all finally ended up in court with a range of personal safety intervention order applications, the matter was referred to mediation. But the conflict had become quite entrenched, and the parties declined mediation at that stage. Now, all the applications went off to the Melbourne Magistrates Court to contested hearings. Now, this situation really had fractured the relationships between the family members, between the young people, and also within the community. A number of community leaders had become involved, and a lot of community members had actually taken sides. Now, why would this matter have been suitable for peacemaking? Now, at NJC and within the Peacemaking Service, we really have an early intervention approach, and we have a significant community presence, and we've developed relationships with key referrers within the community. So prior to the matter escalating to court, we could have intervened at a much earlier stage through a referral from perhaps the police officer the first time he'd been called out, from an actual community member themselves, or perhaps one of the services within the community that was aware of the situation. Also, peacemaking is a very inclusive service. We would have involved all those that had been impacted by the situation, and also involved those that could have made the situation better. We would have involved the young people, the family, the community members, the leaders, the police. We may even have had representatives from the schools. And we would have probably had a staged approach to the whole situation. Peacemaking can have a one-off session, but because we're dealing with more complex matters, we would have probably, for this situation, had a range of sessions over a period of time, whatever the people within the situation needed. So throughout our consultations, we learnt so much about what the community needs were around conflict, what existed, and in response to that, we began developing the Peacemaking Service. So within peacemaking, we're using an action learning approach to ensure that the service is flexible and responsive to community needs. We're also, it's a broad-based and flexible service. The approach we're using is we're accepting referrals from a wide range of sources within City of Yarra. Now, if a matter isn't suitable for peacemaking and more suitable for another service, we will refer the matter to that service. We also have a toolbox. I refer to it as a toolbox where we offer restorative processes, a range of restorative processes that provide clients with different options to suit their needs. And we can also tailor those processes to suit the situation. And we do that in a collaborative way with the people we're working with. Now, we're hoping to be able to further down the track train up community volunteers to actually facilitate peacemaking circles as they do over at Red Hawk, and that'll probably be once the service is more established and COVID is hopefully finished with. Now, also the principles that I suppose are the foundations of the service from the Australian Association of Restorative Justice, and they are cause no further harm. So we have a robust assessment and preparation process in place. We also work with those involved in a collaborative way. Louise spoke about setting relations right. And what we mean by that is, and it will differ from case to case, it may mean that relations are established or they're restored, or they simply no longer involve conflict, or they may actually be formally ended. That was the framework within the service. What we've been focusing on, we've been establishing a community presence. We've been building those relationships up with the key referrers, with different parts of the community. We're focusing on multi-party neighbourhood conflict with an emphasis on public housing. And we're also focusing on conflict involving young people. So it can be between young people and their family, though we're not dealing with family violence matters. There's a specialised Department of Justice service that does that. And we're also looking at working with young people and local police to build that relationship. We're also providing victims of crime with access to restorative options at any stage of the criminal justice process. Now, peacemaking is not just about conflict. It can be used to improve relationships. So we're promoting peacemaking as a way of assisting groups to discuss issues of importance or common concern and to improve relationships within groups. We're also currently working with the NJC Court to provide peacemaking for matters for personal safety intervention order matters at the Neighbourhood Justice Centre Court. We've been doing a bit of work in North Richmond. It's the Peacemaking Project. It's an actual project in North Richmond, and it's a case that developed into a project. Now, for those of you that don't live in Victoria or Australia, North Richmond is an inner city suburb. In North Richmond, the community of North Richmond has witnessed high rates of heroin use, drug-related crimes, and unfortunately overdose-related deaths compared to other Melbourne suburbs. Now, the Victorian government established the medically supervised injecting room in North Richmond as a part of a broader push to address long-standing issues within the community, and also to reduce the impact of drugs and to save lives. Now, the injecting room and surrounding safety issues have really polarised parts of the North Richmond community, which has caused conflict and breakdown in relationships. You have those for the injecting room, those against it, those against the location of it. It has caused the community to really have a breakdown of relationships. It's a very emotionally charged issue. Now, the Peacemaking Service was approached by a number of stakeholders towards the end of last year to discuss if peacemaking could assist in some way. So we began meeting with key stakeholders, the City of Yarra Council, the North Richmond Community Health Service, Victoria Police, Department of Health and Human Services, and we began planning a peacemaking approach to address the conflicts and the community concerns. Now, all the work we've been doing does align with recommendations of the recently released medically supervised injecting room independent review, which came out in June 2020. And we're also aligning the peacemaking work with work that other stakeholders are doing in North Richmond. Now, what peacemaking is doing in North Richmond is we're using structured and facilitated meetings in a range of formats with the aim of reducing the tensions around the injecting room and helping people move towards a collective understanding and constructive action to improve the situation. So we're bringing people together, individuals and agencies with the relevant lived experience. We're also reviewing and learning from earlier efforts and building on those past successes. So far, what we've done is we've conducted 5 online peacemaking meetings to review previous community engagement efforts in North Richmond, and we've involved over 50 stakeholders and community members in those meetings. Now, during each of these online meetings, we've guided participants through a series of stages to help them describe and reflect on their experiences of community engagement and to identify useful insights. Now, we're currently distilling the insights gathered in each meeting, and we'll be providing those to the participants and also to stakeholders and this will assist with future community engagement moving forward. Now, this is only the first stage within the North Richmond Peacemaking Project, and with the lifting of restrictions, we're hoping to be able to have the trickier conversations in face-to-face meetings. And that's it from me. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.